Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui. Welcome along to this live panel today, this morning. We're recording this on the 26th of January in the morning, Friday morning here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or wherever you may be in the world. It may be Thursday afternoon or evening for you. I'm really excited to be able to introduce this panel of experts for this discussion today. It's a very timely and important discussion around the intersection of literacy and play. We know that literacy is a very hot topic for certainly our Kiwi teachers as we face the 2024 school year and a new government and a new direction with policy. But I also am aware of internationally, there is a lot of pressure at the moment in the post-pandemic world to address the concerns around how the pandemic has impacted children's access to quality literacy and numeracy instruction. So that is something that is on top for everyone. But I know these wonderful women here in this panel will have lots to share about that. And we've got some interesting documents and things to share with you as well, particularly for our Kiwi followers, to hopefully allay some concerns or worries about what the year might look like for you. So I'm going to go around and introduce the panel, and for the purpose of saving time, I'm not going to get everyone to introduce themselves individually. I'm going to whip round and then we're going to get straight into the topic this morning. For those of you who don't know, who don't follow along with too closely, we have Linda Chair here joining us, and Linda is the co-director along with myself of Along with Education. She happens to be my mum as well, which is wonderful. And Linda has had a long career working in education as a teacher, as a deputy principal and at times acting principal. And her most recent position prior to Along with Education was running Along with Forest School, where she taught in the forest all day, every day, both through play and ensuring that children had literacy and numeracy instruction as well. We have Jill Skittrip here. Jill is a facilitator with Along with Education, and again, an illustrious career as an educator in a variety of fields, but her passion particularly is in the new entrant junior end of the school and in that literacy acquisition. She's got too much experience for me to list here in 1 hour, but she is certainly absolutely passionate about developing the whole child and also this love of literacy as well. I have Amber Donaldson joining me here. Amber is a facilitator with Along with Education. She's also a full-time classroom teacher at Oxford Crescent School in Upper Hutt. And Amber has been on the play journey for quite some time. And I've had the absolute joy of working alongside her in at Oxford Crescent and seeing the practice that she engages in. She's a play lead there at the school, and most recently has been involved in both leading the play, but also training under the structured literacy model and implementing both and navigating both those contexts. So she'll have a bit to say about that. We have Anne Rush, who's joined us here as classroom teacher from Northcote Primary School in Auckland. And Anne is amazing. If you haven't seen the images of her classroom, you need to hop on and have a look at some of the images she shares on our Joy of Play Facebook group, as well as over on the New Entrant Year 2 page too, don't you, Anne? And just the most beautiful classroom environment to welcome our new entrant children into their first experience at school. And I know that she also too has a passion for incorporating literacy and play into that space. And finally, I have here Tony Howard, and Tony has joined us from Auckland as well. Tony's got a number of hats, but I first met Tony as a teacher at Matu Ngaru School, also in Auckland, and she led the play there and was a very passionate play advocate, and then also hopped on the structured literacy train as well, and has been recently working with Clarity Education in the Ready for Learning space. And she has just this week agreed to begin working with Along with Education as well, particularly to support teachers navigating that structured literacy combined with play space. And that's where we're hoping to really utilise Tony's expertise so that it's not a big scary thing, that they don't sit in opposition to each other pedagogically, but that there's a lovely natural balance in the middle between the two. So Tony will be a wealth of knowledge around that as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to kick these questions off first of all, straight into the topic that I know is hot on everyone's minds, out of the campaign trail last year, where we had the real push for structured literacy in schools. And I know many schools are doing that already, and variations of that in terms of different programs, different providers and things like that. But there is a misunderstanding or a misperception that if you adopt structured literacy, then that is in complete opposition to a play-based pedagogy. And so I'm going to put that question to the panel first of all, considering this rhetoric around structured literacy and play, considering that now there is this mandated 1 hour requirement related to literacy in classrooms. How do we go about achieving that balance without losing the beauty of both? Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Go for it.
Well, I just made a note that I think, as we all know, literacy goes across all curriculum areas. You cannot sort of just squash literacy into 1 hour a day. And also on top of that, what do we mean by literacy? You know, it's multifaceted. We've got, you know, our visual language, our oral language, we've got reading, we've got writing, and we all know that all those things happen throughout the day. I think for me, the main thing. Apologies, everyone. Our internet went down. Thank you for waiting. I was hoping I'd come back to a room. So where did we get to? Because I'd headed over to Linda and she would have been lost in the process as well. Jill, where were we at?
Well, she was talking about the integration of the curriculum and that literacy is throughout the day and throughout whatever interaction is happening in the dynamic classroom environment.
Great. Okay. So can we head over maybe to Amber? Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience as Linda joins me here in my office?
Oh, sure. Hi, everybody. Oh, my brain's gone completely dead. I agree with what Linda was saying, like you'll integrate literacy across your whole morning and you'll have, by the time you've done your sort of shared reading and your oral language and your direct acts of teaching in your groups and your social coaching and literacy coaching in play, you're going to cover that hour or more than that across your day. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to pick up?
I sort of got chopped off,
Yeah.
didn't I? Yeah, I just thought it was a good start for teachers when they're doing their observations is to start looking at how much literacy is in the play to start with. And I think it's really important to jot that down so that they have a good starting point, and then be thinking how they can enhance that with some literacy tools and follow up, you know, responses.
Yeah. Anne, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as Linda started off before our little break, I mean, play and literacy are inexorably intertwined. They just go together, and play is a universal language. And I would say in terms of the curriculum, I mean, I personally as a classroom teacher, I know that I cover that. I know that I well over that, but I think maybe as teachers we'll be looking at how we actually document that. How do we actually show that we cover that?
Yeah.
And being smarter about how we document it and not doing more, but just being a bit smarter. And I think also knowing the curriculum really well. It's not just knowing when you're observing what area they're covering, but identifying the specific language, knowing what part of English in the curriculum you are covering, knowing what counts as literacy. And I think if anything else, this makes you as a teacher reflect on what you actually do and think about what you do. And we all know that's a very powerful part of teaching before we even get to anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder too, I mean, certainly one of the things that we've experienced as PD providers going into school classrooms, and this is going to sound a little controversial, but we have seen some poor literacy instruction. We have seen teachers that have not understood how to teach literacy, some that don't understand all the components of literacy. They may have only been taught or shown or modelled one way of doing something. And so, you know, to be able, first of all, to have, you know, the requirement that there is an hour, so that's a minimum, but also in terms of what support are we now going to be offering teachers to fully understand all that's involved with literacy. And I know for many of us in the PD space, we know that teachers have not had good support to understand the curriculum in its whole. So, and as you're saying, really understanding the curriculum through observation, through showing what children bring first of all to their literacy learning, and building on that is really critical, and documenting that's really important, isn't it? Yeah. Tony, your thoughts?
I was just thinking about the examples that the Minister of Education have put out, you know, timetables of covering an hour, and you'll see on all of them that no matter what curriculum area they've written on that particular block of the day, they've got in brackets, integrates reading, writing, and of course, so that's what we all know. So thinking about what Anne was saying, being smarter in recording it, but not necessarily working harder, because, and once again, that goes back to knowing that when you're teaching art, you're definitely teaching literacy and probably maths as well. So, and then once again in your play, to be able to identify those curriculum areas within it and the components, as Anne was talking about. I just think, you know, we actually cover, how long are the children in the classroom? 4.5 hours of literacy every day, because every day we're doing return and serve with our oral language. So, and of course, oral language is the foundation of literacy. So there we are, done. So even if you did nothing else but talk all day, which I'm very good at, you know, with the children and interact with the children, you're covering it. So I really don't think you need to worry too much. You just have to make sure that that's somewhere written down on paper, because, you know, Aero like it on paper. So, yeah, so that's what I was thinking about. And I think the important thing is that we don't lose the play in this and think I've got to be, you know, teaching literacy for an hour. So, oh yes, I do shared book and I do some, you know, group work, and I might do some handwriting or, you know, modelling writing, whatever it is. Oh my goodness, that doesn't add up to 2 hours. So I better put in some, you know, follow-up activities that are literacy based instead of my play. And I think the other thing is you've already got follow-up activities in your play that are literally based. So be able to see that and identify that and record that, and however you record your planning, play, and things. So yeah, so it's knowing it, isn't it? It's knowing those components, and there's a lot out there. So I'm just thinking of and of course in the moment type play invites as well. Of course it will all be around literacy as well. It just came to me then, but I was thinking, I mean, Anne is the expert at how to use books in play, and what was the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, yes, of course, you know, I got this idea from Linda many years ago about the clipboards and writing. You know, so having clipboards around with no matter what the invite is, so they can, you know, use their visual language to plan or label or write something or instructions, or, you know, it's there so much that yeah. So that's what I was just thinking about too. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking too, you know, when we've seen play and the lack of writing implements.
Yeah, we still don't see a lot of that in classrooms. And we always say to teachers, use the literacy tools like loose parts, just put them out amongst the play. I think for me, the biggest thing that seems to come through is that we may be open to misinterpretation. And I think that's something that we have to watch, that some people in our schools may misinterpret these mandates and start sort of putting their own rules in there.
And I've spoken about this in my presentation for the conference in some detail, so I've really gone into this a little bit more, but ultimately there is the habit within education where we tend to go off what we hear in the media rather than looking at the wording of policy. And one of the things, and that's again not a criticism of teachers, we don't have time to read policy documents, you know, that there's the least exciting thing to read after a long day in a classroom, right? But if we want to ensure that we are doing right by our kids, make sure we know the policy. Now, that might mean that senior leadership need to break down the policy and put it in front of teachers during a meeting time or whatever, so that it reassures teachers, because I've just put a link in the chat there related to the curriculum release around the requirement of an hour a day reading, writing and maths. And I personally was quite heartened by the message that it has there, because when I read that, I thought, well, if you're a good teacher, you're doing that anyway, right? So to me, if you are able to hand on heart say that you are running a really informed, evidence-informed, research-based literacy delivery program, then you will be ticking all the boxes of the policy. What we have to be careful of is that teachers don't go off what we hear in the media and take things out of context and literally, and suddenly think, my God, I have to have kids sitting for 1 hour and they've got to have a book in front of them for 1 whole hour and they've got to have a pencil in their hand for 1 whole hour writing. You know, we've got to take the extreme interpretation away and approach this in a really common sense way. So we start by reading the policy and looking at what it is that they are ensuring that we're doing. So if I go on to the next question, because I think that leads in quite nicely to this idea around applying scientific insight in the classroom. So we know that there's an enormous amount of research about play's role in cognitive and literacy development. You know, we also know that there's this rhetoric, there's this momentum of what we call the science of reading at the moment. Interestingly, I'm hearing some new information around how scientific this science is, which is interesting. So I'd encourage people to have a little look at that, based on neuroscience and things like that. But ultimately, every time research is done, we learn a little bit more. We learn a little bit more about how our brains work and how we can support others to learn. So knowing what we know about play, we've talked a little bit about how we can enhance learning in the play. Anyone else got any ideas or tips around knowing what we know about play in relation to then assisting children to grow their literacy skills directly? Amber, would you like to go?
Yeah, I loosely, knowing what we know about how children play, and I like to be able to help children to see the what they're doing in a concrete way. So, for example, we had a whole lot of pogo sticks at our school last year, and they were really, really well used. But you were able to really point out to children that persistent skill and practice and how it felt to really be in the pit with trying to balance and jump, and a lot of them really struggled with it, but everyone made really small increments of progress every time they hopped on that pogo stick and gave it a go. And then we were able to relate that feeling of being in the pit and that frustration, but also link it to the feelings of success when you were able to point out the progress that they were making in that skill. And then bring that back when you're sitting at your jelly bean table and you sat down for your structured literacy lesson, and we were really struggling with blending two letters together and making that word and sounding that out. And we were able to link it back to how it felt when we were on that pogo stick, and how that connection of that real feeling that we had outside and the success we had after many times of progress, we could say, hey, it's going to happen here too. This is what reading's about, because reading's not a skill like pogo sticking where you can see your progress physically, and but it is there. And so I found that linking things that the children were doing in play, like the monkey bars or building that tower or jumping on the pogo stick, to the actual reading or literacy or working through those tasks that you couldn't feel or see your progress quite so easily, made massive connections for lots of my children. And so they were able to go, oh, okay, well, I'll sit here a bit longer and persevere through this because I know that I'm going to make progress the same way that I did when I was pogo sticking. So I love that. I really love that connection between physical play and anything that happens in the classroom, and how you can bring that back for the child to those times where it's really struggling. And writing's the same.
Yeah. And that's the connection to being a disposition, the disposition of being a learner, right? Yeah, so it's a much bigger thing. Yeah.
And I felt for my children in my class, particularly last year, that really helped their literacy skills, because they were able to go, oh, well, this bit's tricky, but if I keep practicing, I'm going to overcome it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something, Amber, that's really important. As teachers, we know is perhaps the idea of connecting, and children don't naturally connect, their knowledge to other areas, or they don't connect what they learned yesterday to what we're doing today. And I think teachers need to be more proactive on this, that idea of, remember when you were trying to do that yesterday, how difficult that was. Well, look, here we are today, and we've learned something and we can progress a bit more. So, and connecting between, learning areas as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Jill, did you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, thank you.
Silly question.
Thanks very much. Well, I just found this really interesting quote from Panksepp, and I'm not an academic. As you know, I'm like to be down on the floor and in the play. Good solid play releases dopamine, and motivation to learn begins in play. And seeking and the social joy of bonding, exploring, and having adventures within releases that desire and to carry on investigating and going through difficult learning parts. Amber, that zone of proximal development where I'm actually going to do this because it's meaningful and it's passionate and it's the urge, as we've all talked about. And I just listening to the principal, Don Buck, who I've worked with, when he mentioned about exceptionality, being exceptional, and that's the emotion, that's their quote for their school. And I was thinking urges, when we're observing the urges within the play, and the environment is crucial. The third teacher is your environment. So how are you going to see all these things and respond to them if you haven't really focused passionately on the environment you're providing? We know that as play theory. But that exceptional, the urge is linked to being exceptional. And so if we squash the urges, and they're not available for our students to orally respond, passionately respond, and be fantasy and be who they are, and that principle, Sandy, he said, my passion is drama and theatre. So here he is managing a hugely complex school with massive challenges, with so much passion. So that goes back to the urge of I was going to say theatre, but so I thought that was really interesting, how that link between urges and exceptionality. And I think literacy, or the other point I wanted to say about that, is the integration of the curriculum. Writing is reciprocal with reading. How do we separate these things when there's so many examples of children who in their play come back and want to write, which I had an example of at another school, hunting, playing the hunting. And the teachers, he rushed in and he said, I want a book in the library about hunting. Well, there wasn't a book in the library about hunting. So the teacher supported this student over time to act out his hunting fantasies, document them, and go back. And eventually a book was published for the school library. So we can't isolate it all out into one little component, dare I say, like high schools. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that
And I
answers the
think,
question.
no. I think too that we have to remember
Pardon?
that reading and writing are tools, aren't they? They're tools for learning. They're tools for accessing everything.
Yes.
They're very important tools, but they aren't subjects. They aren't, they're skills that have to be learned in order for us to be able to access other learning. And that's something that I think we easily forget when we put so much focus on them. Anne, can I come to you with that question?
Well, I was actually just, as Jill was talking, I was actually thinking of a very practical example that happened in my class last year. So I had a little boy start at the beginning of term 4, and I had a sister a few years ago, and she came to school ready to go. She could write her name, knew her letter sounds, all those kind of things, just ready to hit the ground running. And Mum was very concerned about her younger brother coming. She said, look, he doesn't want to write his name. He's not interested in looking at books. He just wasn't engaging with any of those things, and she was really concerned. So I had a chat with her, and I said, well, just let's get him into school, let's settle and see how he goes, and we'll take it from there. And so I made a special effort with this boy just to observe where he was playing, what he was doing, what he was engaging, looking at his schema, all those kind of things. And he was extremely articulate, and I managed to hook him into reading and writing by having books that really related to what he was playing with that we could link to and making those connections. And I would say, for example, at reading time, gosh, I noticed you playing with so-and-so. I found this great book. Let's have a look at it. And you can take it home and share it with Mum. And I managed to hook him in to reading and writing. And he's still at the very beginning of both of those journeys in terms of getting ideas out and down. But Mum was over the moon. She came to me at the end of last term and said, look, I can't believe the change in him. He's coming home, he's wanting to read, he's wanting to write, he's seeing himself as a learner, as a reader and writer. And that's just what I needed, just what you want to hear. And those other things will come. He's got beautiful oral language. Those other things will come. If you haven't got oral language, how can you read or write? If you haven't got things to draw on and you can't share ideas. So I think if you're really looking at what the children are interested in, taking the literacy or whatever else it happens to be from that, you can't go wrong.
Yeah,
You've got those
absolutely.
kids hooked into learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's all about relationships, isn't it? Which is what we know, that, good relationships and being in tune with your students. Yeah.
And play enables that connection, doesn't it? Tony, your thoughts?
I'm thinking about neurodevelopment. So obviously, as Anne was saying, oral language, if you've got that, you're on your way. Of course, there's some other aspects that come out through play and that help us learn, not just literacy, but anything. So I'm sort of thinking of, put my Ready for Learning hat on here and thinking about things like your movement skills, whether if you're going to become a writer, you're going to have core strength and balance to be able to hold yourself on a chair and sit up for a while. And we all know our 5-year-olds in our mats at the moment find sitting up and sitting still for even a shorter period of time quite challenging. So, and that's because a lot of them have not had that ability, the time to run and jump and roll and skip and hang upside down and all of that. So our children actually need to move. You don't turn 5 and boom, you're ready to sit up and listen. So if in our play, we should have lots of movement. And if anyone says, I often say, when they're running around or whatever, they're getting ready to read and write because they are. So that's so movement, of course, gross motor, we grow from the inside out. So gross motor before fine motor. Seeing, visual discrimination, visual memory, auditory memory, all of those things are developed through play. And so it doesn't have to look like literacy to be literacy. So, and that's going back to knowing your why and all of that, So, I think if you're listening today and you're thinking, I don't know what that's got to do with literacy, that's your thing to, go and look into it and say, look at the brain development and how, if you want children to be able to notice the difference between a P and a Q and a D and a B, then they've got to be able to, can they do the I Spy box? Can they find Where's Wally? You know, that because if they haven't had lots of practice in visual discrimination, then they're going to see, you know, find that difficult. Our brains are wired to see mirror image the same. So we've got to actually give those children the opportunity to see that print's not like that. Yeah, that was my thoughts.
Yeah, and throwing in their rhythm and rhyme as well. You know, that the rhyming that we need, the rhythm that we need to be able to identify, and you know, we know all the importance of those early nursery rhymes and, you know, repeated patterns and those kinds of things. And I think one of the things that, you know, yes, if we and look, this is not out of the policy. This is just plain and simple important developmental acknowledgement, right, of when you have a child arrive at school. If we know they're coming in at around a developmental stage of 3 or 4, we're not, you know, it's inappropriate to put a book in front of them, because that's not what you do with a 3 or 4-year-old that's typically developing. But what you would do with that 3 or 4-year-old is do lots of rhyme, rhythm. You'd be reading to lots of that, as you say, Tony, lots of spotting things, looking at things, modelling oral language. And so you might have a 5 or 6 or a 10-year-old in your classroom that still requires all of that in order to be able to engage in the act of reading eventually. So we still need to continue with that idea of developmental readiness and making sure that those areas have been addressed before we have those appropriate expectations of what they can do. The other thing I just wanted to bring up with this one here too is the role of executive function. We talked about this a little bit in our earlier discussion, but I do know with my academic hat on that there's significant research now between the development of executive function and children's ability to comprehend what they're reading as they become more fluent readers later on. So they need executive function skills to be good comprehending readers. So I think there's been a lot of focus on the decoding aspect of reading, the mechanics of reading, and getting kids to be able to decode text. What we've heard less of is the importance of being able to understand what they're reading once they've decoded. And that particularly comes later for our more fluent readers. And we know that while that decoding is being picked up and learnt, that skill of decoding, if play is happening alongside, then we're also developing executive function skills, which will then come together in this beautiful fusion of a reader who can both decode and comprehend, which is what we want our readers to be able to do. So there is the research, if we're talking the science there is the research that links play to that executive function and our reading outcomes later on. So going to our next question there, overcoming implementation challenges. And I'm wondering here whether, I'm sure if anyone is listening and has any particular challenges that they're facing, I'd love to hear from you. Any questions, you know, because we can talk about the ideal situation here, but we know, as I said earlier, there's multiple interpretations of how things should look. I'd love to unpack what some of these common obstacles are when we try and integrate play with literacy, and particularly if we're now sort of feeling the pressure of this 1 hour a day, and any practical solutions or approaches that we can address with this. So we have had some ideas already, but if anyone's got any questions or they want to share a scenario that they're wondering about, then please feel free to do that. Anything from the panel so far? Any challenges that you're seeing already coming through that teachers are navigating? Amber.
I can speak from experience here. We started structured literacy about 18 months ago in our school, and if you're beginning this journey, for us, it's a lot of headspace. You're not really flipping your reading program on its head, but you kind of are. That's sort of what it felt like for us. And at the same time, you're trying to balance your structured literacy learning for yourself and maintaining the play within your classroom or within your pod. So it felt like for a little while it kind of went like this, with structured literacy taking up a lot of headspace and time, and play just it'll just keep going because these children are experts at it, so they'll still be in it, but you didn't feel like you were as connected to it because you were following a lesson plan that was new while you got used to it. So in terms of an obstacle, that felt like quite a significant one for me. And my suggestion would be just sit in it for a while, get structured literacy under your belt and feel like you've got a bit of a handle on it, the same way you did when you were learning to teach in a play-based environment. And then over time, if you're cognitive about it and you know, you're really thinking about making it balance, it will come. Your children will still be experts at what they're doing. They'll enjoy it. The other thing I felt for me that helped to get more of a balance was to sort of set myself a bit of a time, like, right, do your lesson, then get up and actively be involved in what was happening in your classroom, so that you were noticing, recognizing, were able to respond, and then come back and do your next group. So maybe you didn't do as many for a little while you were balancing it, but the balance for me it did come back, but I had to actively work to do it. But also acknowledge that it's a lot of time and headspace for you as a teacher when you're taking on something new. So give yourself that space and time to feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. It's a really good reminder, and I know it's similar to the reminders we give teachers in the play space, that you know, it's okay to not get it right the very first time you do this. It's absolutely fine, and this is a learning curve, and you know, the same way we would expect our kids to take time to understand things, give yourself the grace to do that as well. It's super important to have that. Anne, any thoughts for you?
Again, from a very practical perspective, if I've got, say, for instance, a shared book, which we all know that's my passion, if I've got a language experience related to that, and I'm wanting to see, hopefully, to see some play sort of lead on from that, and I know I've got that in the back of my head for that day, if I was worried about covering literacy, my time, or getting those things done, or getting something in the book bags, I always make sure that I do that first thing in the morning, so that then I've got the freedom. If then I can just run with the play. I know that they've got their phonics done, or they've got structured literacy, or they've got their reading book. I've got that done. I can let that run, whatever happens for the rest of the day. I've got the freedom to do that. And if I'm making notes about that, and if I didn't get to something, well, that might be first on the list the next day. And if I'm looking at time, I'd be looking across the week. What would be the average? Sometimes you have a huge day where it's just a maths day and everything's maths. So I might make a note of that. And the next day I'll be covering the other things first. So if you're looking at averages and looking across a week rather than panicking about each day, whether you've got it done, I think it makes it a bit more achievable.
Yeah, and I like how you've mentioned the word average, because the word average features in this document that's just been released that I've included in the chat box there, where they're talking about on average an hour a day. So please don't fall into the trap where you set the timer and right click, we've clocked in for 1 hour of literacy and then we'll clock out. No one is sitting on your wall with a timesheet here, you know, making sure that you're sticking to that. It's got to be an average rather than, you know, absolutely spot on every time. I think it would be unrealistic to ask any teacher to be spot on with time in anything in their classroom, let alone literacy, because that's just, you know, working with animals and children, right? Nothing's predictable. So we have to be careful about that as well. So, yeah, again, the highs and the lows as well. Jill, did you have any thoughts around overcoming some challenges there?
Well, most teachers I work involved with talk about time. Thank you, Amber. That was so practical. And I think that it is having that headspace about interpreting, recognising literacy and numeracy in the play, and explicit teaching within the play is actually how that time factor can be addressed. It's not, it's fluid. So, and integrating the curriculum, like for instance, the baking, literacy, maths, oral language, speaking, listening, it's all incorporated within that. So being smart about how you present your invitations or respond, and think about identifying the curriculum within, as we talk about promoting the vocabulary of the the curriculum, and also developmentally appropriate. As you talked about before, Tony, about the time on the mat, that terrifies me, 5-year-olds sitting for 45 minutes making sounds. That's an extreme. So you're just responding to the children and their needs and forgiving yourself, and like what you didn't do today, you can do tomorrow. And do something that follow the passion of the students, but with your teacher's lens and your kid have knowledge on your shoulder.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's where it comes back to keeping some sort of a document, for accountability. And sometimes if teachers write things down, then looking back on it, you think, oh yes, I did do that, and it took all that time, and that was literacy. So it's not only for other people, but it's to help and support teachers as well.
Yeah, would be reassuring for you, because I think, again, as teachers, we're so hard on ourselves. We're our worst critics. And I literally was just having a conversation with a member of the public this morning, because walking the dog, and she was walking her dog, and she knows I'm in education, and she said, oh, what are we going to do about this education mess that we're in at the moment? Which I thought, I'm the wrong person to address me on that at the moment. But she did, talk about this idea of, the teachers. And I said, it's funny, no teacher goes to school every morning thinking, today I'm going to really ruin that child's educational experience. I'm going to really muck it up for them so that they don't ever achieve in life. We do want to go in and do the best for our kids. And so because of that, we often actually are hard on ourselves as well. So if there are ways that we can self-monitor so that we can give ourselves a pat on the back at the end of the week and say, I did do that, and look at that, and look at that opportunity. I think that's also going to negate some of that public opinion out there around the education system and what teachers are or are not doing at the moment. So yeah, definitely having that too. Tony, your thoughts on that?
Some of the things that other people have said, I've written down to talk about. So I was thinking about that, writing it down as you go, and it's not just writing down the teaching that you did, but if you had a conversation, for instance, Amber's conversation with resilience and on the pogo sticks and things like that, that obviously is an executive functioning teaching opportunity that's going on. And as we know, executive functioning is part of literacy. So it's noting those things down. You're in the middle of this reading lesson, and you've got 10 minutes, and the first 5 minutes is making connection with resilience and pogo sticks, and then, oh my goodness, I've only got 5 minutes to go. So what we tend to do as teachers, of course, is make it 15 or 20 minutes, because we've got to get through the lesson. And so that's why I always think I actually do have a timer when I take groups, just that I know that 10 minutes has passed, because I'm dealing with 5-year-olds and I've just asked them to sit there and listen and interact, obviously, in learning, but for 10 minutes, and that's a big ask for many 5-year-olds. So so that for when that timer goes, oh sorry, it's my phone, when that note, turn off phone before Zoom. So when that timer goes, you're aware that 10 minutes has gone past, but if everybody's happy and engaged and everything's going, you might go a bit longer. Or you might think, this is great for today, we'll stop here. That's where I start tomorrow. So that was the other thing I was thinking about. And valuing play as well. So that's also that 10 minutes timer, why I do that, because I want the children to know, yes, we're learning about whatever we're learning in this group work, but you're also going to go back and do some more learning within your play. So I value that. And I think it was Amber who talked about getting up and going around, if I might be wrong. So that's why that, we've had 10 minutes talking about blah, blah. Let's, get back to our play now. So, and valuing that, and you standing up and going to see what everybody's been learning, in their play. So I just, that's two things that I was going to talk about. I don't know, nobody's talked about the one obstacle I get a lot is noise, because when you're trying to take reading groups or writing groups and you've got children playing, noise is a factor, definitely. And And so, yeah, that's one thing that I always think about your space. What other spaces can you use? You know, do you have a bit of grass outside or a bit of concrete outside? Do you
We're doing a science fair next term.
Right.
Next term.
Okay.
Yep, keep going. Sorry, that was someone not on mute. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so think about how you can, because space dissipates noise. So working with the teacher next door or whatever. So I really think that's it's a big thing to do. And also remember, you are the teacher. So we're teaching through play. So sometimes you do have to make some hard calls. So things that I've had to, some teachers, do the numbers thing. So, this particular activity, we're only going to have 4 people because that, it's not something that you want to do, but sometimes it's necessary. It may not have to be there all the time. It might be just through a particular hour of the day that you do that. And the other thing is I have also done in the past is put a pause on particular play invitations or play provocations during when I'm taking groups, just because they are rowdy activities, and that's cool, but we can't have rowdy when I'm trying to take a little group. So, and that's okay. It's okay to make those little executive decisions as a teacher, because we are teaching through play. I mean, I would never ban anything. It's always, of course, the first thing is to, if something's creating noise, it's to talk to the children about, hey, I've got this problem, or we've got this problem. How can we solve it? But yeah, so that's the biggest obstacle I hear coming through is noise.
Yeah.
And of course, on task behaviour, but of course that's all about promo, which is another subject altogether. But I'll talk about that in another question.
And going back to your points around time and Amber's points around time as well, I know when I was working as an RTLB, and certainly when I came into doing observations through this role in the classroom, it's amazing just how long children are sitting for that we don't plan. We call a group, and that group's sitting there ready to go, but then we get someone come in the classroom that needs to talk to us about something, or someone's just spilt something over on the wet area, or someone's just, got wet out by the fountain. So suddenly you've got this group sitting there waiting for their reading, and you've been called away or you've been interrupted, but their time is still ticking, that precious time of their concentration. And so it's really important, if you're trying to juggle, if you're feeling like, it's all a bit chaotic, to pop the timer on and again, get yourself some data, find out how long those kids are sitting for, and does it make sense that you're feeling like you're having to pull them back to re-engage after about 6 or 7 minutes of your time, which has actually been 10 to 12 minutes to 15 minutes of their time, and start having a little, critical evaluation of how much time they are actually there. And the one other thing that my tip for teachers with any child is that if you've got a child who's sitting in front of you and they've been engaged, and now you're starting to have to say to them, turn around, I need you to finish. No, turn around, focus on, you've lost them. They've gone. No point. They've exited the building, right? Take the moment and go with it. And, I think we expect children's focused for a lot longer than developmentally what they're able to do. So again, don't fall into the trap of what we're expecting of children, but what they are capable of doing in a moment instead. I think it's really important. Yeah. Amber, did you have something?
Yeah, when we started structured literacy, because they say your lessons need to be 15 minutes long, that's sort of how long it's going to take to get through what you need to get through in a lesson. And I really struggled with that with many of my learners, and in my heart I knew, well, this isn't going to work for 15 minutes. And it was about building some stamina as well. And once they got used to lessons, they knew that the review was going to be this, and then we were going to move on to this. And we really had to build some stamina around it. And then we did get to, still in an age appropriate sort of range, but sometimes we could get to 10 to 12 minutes or a little bit longer, depending on the age of or ability of the children. But it was easier to chunk it for those that couldn't sustain longer than 5 minutes, and do it every day for a little bit, rather than trying to go, well, we haven't done 15 minutes, so you're not leaving the table until you have to trust your gut and know your learners and be really okay with that and
Yeah.
trust yourself. Yeah.
It's like sitting there at the dinner table saying you're not leaving till you've eaten your broccoli. You know, do you want to get into that battle, and how bad do you want to demonize broccoli? You know, so and also just thinking about our neurodiverse learners for a moment there as well. I know when I was working with children who really need a time frame to work to so that they can manage themselves and their focus, it's actually okay to have the timer for the children, you know, to have a visual timer, particularly if you're helping them navigate between something they want to do and something they don't want to do, or they're finding tricky to change out of or transition out of, is to actually have the timer and say, I'm only going to need you for 7 minutes or however long. Here's the timer. When we're finished with 7 minutes, we're done. You can go. And that's so powerful for those neurodiverse learners, because A, they can manage themselves in that time and they'll be watching the timer, but B, it's building a trusting relationship. You know, many teachers will say, it's just 10 minutes. No, it's not, right? It's 12 or 15 or 17. You know, those kids know if it's 10 minutes or not. So actually having the timer visually for them, I know you can get clocks that are visual, particularly for autistic kids, so that it shows how much time's left. So it's counting down, you know, whatever it takes to be able to help children, as Amber said, build that stamina to stay focused for that short period of time, because that's a skill they have to learn as well.
I found that really worked well in the forest, because to try and get children to come away from that outdoor environment to come and sit and read with me or to do some writing, I had to reassure them that I wouldn't keep them for very long, and that when we had finished, that they could go straight back and do what they were doing before, and that was reassuring for them.
Yeah. So final question now is evaluating success, making adjustments. We've kind of touched briefly on some documentation or the need to document. We've talked about this idea of you know, celebrating successes, but how can we, you know, can you share examples of documentation or ways that, you know, we can be, you know, smarter, not work harder? You know, how can we do that in a way that we can gather these success stories and share outcomes so that we can refine and improve on what we're doing? Anne, can I come to you first on that one?
Okay, this kind of also relates to the question before too. Having multiple ways when you're working with children or observing multiple ways of recording things. Often if I'm sitting with a group or doing some guided teaching of some sort, and you see something amazing happening in the play, you know, if I'm doing writing, for instance, I write on the back of the whiteboard what I've seen, and then I might pop back to that child later and say, oh, I saw that amazing whatever, and revisit it that way. An assessment, as we know, is not just sitting down a ticky sheet where you tick things. There's, you know, using photos, using curriculum links with things. There's just multiple ways of recording that. But I think if we're looking at assessment, my first question I always ask is, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Who is it for? And how will it help the children's learning before I do anything else?
Yeah, great reminder. Yeah.
And again, it's also, again, knowing that curriculum at a deeper level. So you know the outcomes, you know the vocabulary, you're looking for this and during the play. And that, again, if you're doing guided teaching and you happen to earwig and hear a fabulous conversation, I might write down those keywords on the back of my whiteboard, or if my laptop's here, quickly type it down in a random place so I can go back and revisit and notate that afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. We've just I've just been introduced to the wonderful world of Alexa in our house, mainly because my memory is absolutely rubbish at the moment. And the moment that I look in the pantry and decide we need something, I've got Alexa sitting there and I can say, Alexa, you know, add so-and-so to the shopping list. And in some ways, it's kind of what we need in the classroom, although I can imagine the kids having loads of fun with it as well. But, you know, some way of just saying, you know, Alexa, you know, Sam just said this, note to self. Remember, you know, we need some way of it's in the moment documentation, isn't it? It's in the moment gathering of data to then be able to be in a place to reflect on afterwards. Jill.
Well, I think the challenge of capturing what's happening in the room is huge, and they were great ideas about recording. And some teachers find it really hard to walk around with a clipboard and the notebook and everything else that they need when they're in that stage of learning and observing. But I think if you're a visual teacher, then just quickly take a photo, even if you're sitting at your teaching table and you see something, and that will trigger your memory around what was happening in that moment, capturing the authentic moment. And I think actually, as you talked about, being physically in the play and prioritizing that as opposed to sitting behind the table. And I love all the ideas of the timer, etc. And a literacy lens on your play, so that in your rich environment, you've got that literacy, you're noticing the genre and you're responding to the curriculum and knowing, then promoting through your invitations, the fictional writing, reporting, etc., so that you are focusing on the curriculum and you're recording with your learning stories, or eventually your note-taking and your observation sheets, where that learning was developing and the literacy within the play. So, and I think that's a huge challenge. So we've got to take away something so that we can do those things and declutter your day, because it's crucial that we have the authentic voice of the student. And it's a huge challenge. So I do understand that. And I think that a lot of your ideas are very useful, because I'm not currently in the classroom, but I'm observing in the classroom. So I think it's quite a challenge for us to know how to record that and not get caught up in assessment for its own sake.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, your thoughts?
Well, we've had a great wealth of ideas on how to record things. I actually just, I'm not sure where I got it from, so I hope it wasn't something like the joy of play or something, because then I'm taking cold to Newcastle, aren't I? But somebody mentioned the Smarter app, if you're a technology person, SMATA, is it from? Yeah. So
Bevan Holloway's app, who he used to work along with, but yes, he's a great proponent of notice, recognise, respond. So absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a way. And I used to, I just always have my phone, because like Jill, photos. And when I used to use Seesaw, you can actually go straight into Seesaw and photograph. You don't have to upload your photos. So that's a lovely idea. Another great idea I've seen is that some schools have those whiteboards with the sliding doors in front of them. So you can, using Anne's idea of, taking a couple of notes, that you can actually do it, and then you can slide it across for privacy, because so if a parent in the room, for instance, can't read your notes about something. So, but yeah, I've used all of those ideas. I worked with a teacher in an ECE who actually used her lanyard and hung her notebook on it, so in her pencil, so she had it there. It wasn't in the way, but she could literally write down, which I thought was a lovely idea. And she was in training at ECE, and her ECE took it on board. So it was lovely to see it coming from, a great idea coming from someone who was less experienced than the people that she was working with. Yeah, so those are all ideas. The other thing I love is to see the reciprocal learning happening, observing it with the children, whether it's from play or explicit teaching. So I think, how do we measure it? Well, if I'm running around thinking, tomorrow I need to get out some more paper or some clipboards, or I need to get a book about hunting, or the children are wanting some green stuff because they're trying, whatever, I've got to look from green material scraps or whatever it is, that's you're being effective, aren't you? So if you're busy like that, then I think that's another way of looking at it. I think if you're just the same old things happening every day and you're not doing anything, then are you being effective? So is there learning happening? So that's one way. And of course, the other way I love is when you've been explicitly teaching something and then you see it in the play. So the learning pit idea that Amber was talking about, I've got a lovely photo of a couple of my children and they've drawn the learning pit on the whiteboard, and they're saying, you know, I think you're down here in the learning pit because you're getting pretty angry. So, you know, that sort of thing. So would you like my help? You know, that sort of stuff, you know, so you see that happening in the play. So yeah, so just to
and I think that raises a really interesting point. You know, and I go back to my training, which was a little while ago now, but we were always taught about this assessment process being at the beginning and the end, right? That you assess at the start, you get the information of what they don't know, which was interesting as well, what they don't know, so that you can fill them up and then retest it at the end and check that they've learned what you needed them to learn. And so we sort of see assessment as these points in time rather than this, you know, assessment for learning, this formative assessment process. And I know that formative assessment is recognised and we talk about it a lot, but do we actually really do it? Do we actually really document it? I know teachers are doing it intuitively a lot of the time. We're making adjustments a lot of the time. But by documenting our thinking and our processes, it's actually giving validity to that assessment process. Particularly, I think, in a time when we are seeing some of these policy shifts around accountability and outcomes, you know, these moments in time assessment, you know, which we're talking about for year 3 and up eventually. You know, if we can actually demonstrate, as we know teachers are doing, that assessment should be happening all the time and we're adjusting and reflecting and tweaking all the time, it's a matter of how do we capture that, and that idea of the notebook recording. I'm just thinking of your colleague who had her planning book, and you know, it doesn't have to look pretty. You know, assessment doesn't have to be a nice graph, you know, color coded and all the rest. Assessment is raw data, writing down, you know, Jimmy said this or something, you know, and then I put this in. That's all good assessment data. Too bad if Eero can't read it and you've got to translate it, but you've done it, right? And you can put it in front of them and say, this is a working document. This is me doing my job, assessing kids and, you know, capturing what they're learning and going on from there. And I think that's the true essence of assessment, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, my colleague used to have the most amazing planning sheets, and there were the things there that she intended to teach or activities, etc. But everything had arrows and scribbles on it and things that had changed and things to remind her to do something else the next day. In fact, when you looked at it, it just was, wow, this is what a messy document. But in actual fact, it was amazing that it showed all the learning that was going on and the teaching that was going on.
And it made sense to her, which is the most important thing, right? I know that there are assessment requirements around strategic planning and reporting to the board and those kinds of things. But that's sort of the next level. We need to get this level right, so that this then informs that level of assessment and strategic planning as a result. And I think when we can start to look at assessment and celebrate the success and the progress across all areas, then we're going to start to shake this weight that we have on us around only getting data that we can measure and only getting that quantitative data, when we're absolutely rich with opportunities for qualitative data in our jobs as well. Amber, can I leave you with the final thoughts on that?
Sure can. I like my kids to do some assessment of themselves as well through their learning, and I can't show it to you now because I took it down, but my black wall, which is on the other side of my classroom, became my play wall, and I'm a visual recorder, like you mentioned before, Jill, take photos of what I see, anything that I can see that's worthwhile, most of it is, but I print it out. I can send it straight from my phone to the printer and it comes out on a nice A4 sheet and I whack it up on the wall. Now, the wall looks messy by the end of the year, but if you're on the wall, you know you've done some good stuff and the children can assess themselves against what it is. So we've got lots of little name tags of like perseverance. Lots of the soft skills are up there, but there's literacy and numeracy ones as well, and science, and they can say, oh, well, in this photo, I was doing this, this, and this. And as you're labeling it, you're having the conversation with the children, they're self-assessing, others are hearing it, becomes an invitation for others to do it as well. But you're sharing with them what you're valuing and what you take as really amazing learning, and you get more of it. And so the wall becomes a great big mess, but it has examples of play, it has concrete art, it's got, it showed the development across the term of the fort building and the resources that were used in that. It showed outside things. It really did capture what play looked like in our classroom and what learning looked like in our classroom, and the things that I valued as a teacher and what they began to value in themselves as learners. Yeah,
I
and
just
it's
love
so
that.
visual.
Yeah, I love that, Amber. I love the idea. And, you talk about assessment for learning and asking a child, what have you been learning? And they can pull that adult over to that wall and talk away.
Oh, and they would, and their parents would come through and they'd say, oh, look what I was doing here. This is what I was learning this day. It was about me communicating the rules, and we'd sort of set an intention for play at the start of our session, which meant that if I wasn't going to necessarily see what was happening outside for that time, they would share with me not the activity they were going to engage in, but the learning that they intended to practice or engage in or try. And then when we came back at the end of the session and were sort of saying, I could say, oh, hey, you intended to go out and persevere through this task. How did that perseverance go? And they might elaborate and tell me what they did, but they were able to use that language of that self-assessment, that reflection of their own learning. And it was so exciting. And I just sort of hope that kind of went home and was talked about. What did you learn today? Oh, I learned about, perseverance or persistence. Yeah. And it became sort of a mantra in our classroom, like about practice makes progress. I made progress today. I did. Yeah. And it wasn't just about SATPIN, or it might have been about, it could have been about anything. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and I can attest to that wall, and I know we don't have the fortune of seeing Amber's one, but if anyone's seen Dave Greville's presentation, he proudly demonstrates his wall sitting behind him in his presentation. So please go and have a look at that if you haven't watched it already. I agree. Also too, I think that if our kids aren't using that language around, I learnt this today when I was playing, then we have to critically reflect on what it is that the feedback we're giving kids, because they won't be able to say that without our support. They will go home and just say, I just played today. I played forts today. So to give them the language means that then they will be able to use it. And funnily enough, that's literacy, right?
Isn't it? Yeah. And it's emotional literacy too, about talking about your emotions, because not all of those celebrations are successes, but they're not always through situations that the child will perceive as a good situation. So if you've supported a child through disappointment and you've celebrated them working through that emotion and solving that problem, that is part of their language now too. And that's exciting to see them have that literacy in their emotional language.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Well, look, I'm conscious of the time, and it is a holiday weekend for some. So I do really appreciate all of your time today in sharing your passion for both play and literacy. It's so wonderful to have all of you here to be able to discuss that. And I think I want to leave this on the note that towards the end of last year, I'll admit, I was feeling it was quite doom and gloom. I was a little bit uncertain, but having looked at some of the policy initiatives that are now coming into the public arena and some of the wording around that, I don't think it's quite so much doom and gloom, maybe more gloom than doom, but it's still, we don't have the double whammy, I think. So there is room and positivity in there, and I do wish everyone a successful and happy start to the year, and to, I guess, be kind to ourselves when it comes to thinking about our literacy provision for our kids in our play environment. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Ka kite anō.